Now it is my very great pleasure to introduce firstly Dr Vicki Hargraves, who is the resident ECE expert at the Education Hub, and she's going to be leading the conversation tonight with Alison Sutton, who is Director of Talking Matters, which is a really terrific organisation which has a mission to promote the importance of rich language, particularly within the first 1,000 days, so with babies and infants. And so now I'm going to hand it over to Vicki, who will start the conversation off.
Thank you, Nina. Well, welcome, Alison. Thank you so much for joining us. I've heard lots about the work that you're doing. It's really fascinating, and I'm sure you're going to have a lot to offer us here in the ECE field. But let's start with the big question, really. Why does talking to babies matter?
It's a really great start, isn't it? Who would have thought that we actually had to have an organisation focused on thinking about talking to babies? Talk is fundamental to who we are and how we communicate. And if you think about what families actually do with very small babies, loving touch, responsive interaction with them, and talk. That's what families do to build attachment. And language is just the most fundamental building block for children's pathway into learning. And we started Talking Matters because we could see, in fact, that we're not really changing our reading statistics, our literacy statistics. One of the reasons is we need to promote oral language, what happens right at the beginning. So I can't say more than talking is fundamental to well-being.
Absolutely. And what age does this talking with children become important? We're talking
before birth,
toddlers, infants.
Yeah. So if you think about what we know that every family in the world talks to their children. It's a universal fact, given. And most people actually start talking to baby while you're pregnant. You rub your tummy, you sing to it, you have conversations with it, so does everyone else, so that strangers come up and talk to your stomach. Babies are actually learning in the womb. They're recognising voice, they're recognising music. They're learning a lot of things about language from the cadence of speech. So in fact, the importance of talk happens before. Māori have a process of ori writing lullabies for babies specific to a baby while mum's pregnant, and the family would have, in the traditional days, would have constructed that lullaby specifically for that baby. When they're born, not everybody realises just how much they're communicating. And when you are really in a responsive relationship with baby, very quickly you see that baby's trying to tell you something. But that is actually not necessarily universal. What Talking Matters has been finding is that some people are really not sure about the fact that their baby is communicating, and they've said things to us like, well, why would I talk? I'll wait till they talk. I'll wait till they're older. In fact, all that talking stuff, really, that's what happens at school. And when we talk to them about the relationship between language and brain development and how they're inextricably connected, they're quite surprised. And it's certainly fundamental, really, to building a strong bond with your baby. You can have loving touch, but if you don't have sustained talk, then it's quite hard to communicate. So we're delighted, as we do work with Talking Matters, for mums that we're working with in particular, to say, gosh, I didn't know that they were really trying to reach out and tell me something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so
Vicki, can I just back up a little bit and say, can I just sort of explain a bit about what Talking Matters is trying to do? That might be helpful to people as a bit of a background if they haven't come across us.
Yeah, please do.
That would give me a flow too into the conversation. So we set up Talking Matters as a campaign to shine a light on how important talk actually is, early oral languages. So we started out with the idea that it's not recognised enough. So what we need to do to get that recognition is demonstrate its importance, and we're working with some demonstration projects in Auckland, one outside Auckland at the moment. We're trying to spread the word and that's why this webinar is such a fantastic opportunity to talk to ECE teachers. We want to explain to people the relationship between brain development and oral language, and how those two things lead to literacy. And so we've set this up with a very clear expectation. We want to influence policy and train professional development and initial teacher education and service contracts. But to do that, we actually need to show that families and services get real value from this additional focus on. So that's the kind of rationale about why we're doing it, and with why ECE teachers are actually so important in this. They're such an important player as both advocates for children and actually directly involved in gifting language to kids. I just thought that might be useful to people to know why we got started in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that ECE teachers are probably quite aware of those links between the importance of language and cognitive development for infants. But Alison, does your understanding, is there certain kinds of talk that are more important for helping children?
What we've got now is really clear evidence from neuroscience that the thing that makes the biggest difference is the back and forth talk. So if you think every family in the world talks to their kids, because we actually live our life according to, we all need instructions, it's the get up, eat this, do this, come here, come over here, keep safe. That's just how we live our lives. We all need instructions. And families have that. Every family in the world has that in some kind or other. The magic is the back and forth, the serve and return. And there's really strong body of emerging evidence that when you notice what baby is doing, what baby's interested in, and you wait for baby to activate that interest and you respond, that's what literally sparks their brain and that's what develops their neural pathways. So they're doing brain scans of children who are doing things like babies, infants and toddlers even, who might put them in front of a TV screen and they see what their brain is doing, and then they put them in with an interactive conversation with an adult who's watching what the child does and follows, and the brain just lights up. And that lighting up is what grows the pathways for learning that are so important later in life.
Mm-hmm.
So back and forth talk is really the key, and that's in any language. It's any language. It's not English, and it's not just talk. It's singing and storytelling. Singing's fantastic. Storytelling, reading, talk. All of that's a synonym. The talking matters as bundles together all those ideas, because it isn't just talk. It's all that responsive interaction, play, fun with talk.
I think it's really interesting that you're kind of explaining a bit there about the quality of communication, because obviously in an early childhood setting there is, talk surrounds babies, but this might be adults having a conversation, and it might be the older children having conversations. So it's really important that these babies are being spoken to about the things that they're thinking about and the things that they're doing. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, and I mean, busy ECE centres sometimes struggle, I think, to get the one-on-one time with babies. I think ratios are an issue. It's quite exhausting to have to look after a lot of small children and have that, eye contact and notice what they're doing and respond. So we think that there are systems issues in this, and also, although language is part of initial training, there's actually very little training about infants and babies in a training course to be an ECE teacher, and there's very little professional development available about infants and toddlers. And we are constantly trying to raise the profile of talk in the system, and it's in tamariki, but when you actually see it in action in centres, and we start talking with them about what they might do, they get the idea, maybe we are not as focused on infants and toddlers. Most of the work the Ministry of Education fund is actually 3 and up, not in infants and toddlers. So that's part of why we're focusing particularly on small kids.
I think you've raised a really important point as well, because the type of talk that you're really advocating as being most beneficial for infants and toddlers is the kind that takes time. It takes that time, doesn't it, to be observing the baby and figuring out what it is that they're thinking and about and what they're doing, and being able to respond to that. So it's time to build that relationship as well with the child.
It adds
that kind of attunement.
Absolutely relational. Yeah. And I think it's a particularly challenging job. But I also think that we have to encourage people to not be daunted by the idea it's sustained and long chats. It's sometimes going to be more frequent,
right? And
maybe it's not 50 turns back and forth, but it is a number of turns back and forth. And that's going to be. We'll learn more as we work in more ECE centres.
Yeah. So in terms of, you've explained how your organisation, is really sort of advocating for this kind of talk. Is this an equity issue then? Are some infants and toddlers not receiving equitable opportunities for learning language?
Oh, it's certainly an equity issue. So one of the bits of research we talk about is Jannie van Heese's PhD study about children starting school in Auckland. And we know that some children start school with an expressive vocabulary of 6,000 words, and others start with 3,000 words.
Right.
The Matthew effect.
That's quite a difference.
You start ahead, you stay ahead. So, and we know that poverty makes parenting more difficult, and we know that services who are dealing with lots of really stressed families, have a harder job to do, because they've got to do some often compensatory work to help children. But we also think that the real importance of talking early is just not necessarily recognised enough. So, but yes, it's absolutely equity, and we think that one of the two things really. One is to promote the idea of talking in your first language, in your home language, in your heart language. You don't need to be strong at English, and you don't need to earn a lot of money. You don't need to have gone to special schools to talk and interact really richly and responsively. I think some families think that the best thing they can do for their kids is to talk English. But if their English isn't very strong, they're not necessarily gifting the riches that come from their culture, from their own singing, from their own stories. So one of the things we really think might deal with some of the equity issues is families being confident that talking to babies, infants and toddlers in their home language is a benefit, not a disadvantage. That's one thing. And the second thing is, how do we have family-facing services of all kinds provide as rich an environment and as quality a language environment as possible? Because that's an equity, balancer, isn't it? If you can have really responsive, language-rich ECE, that is a gift to those children who might not be getting as much talk at home. And then there's, of course, talking to parents about the importance of talk, which is another whole strategy.
Thank you, Alison. I think in a moment we'll move on to see the questions that we have from our audience tonight. But just before we do, more on a sort of turning to a more practical level now, can I ask you your ideas about increasing talk with babies within an early childhood setting in particular?
Gosh, it's interesting, isn't it? So one of the things I'll tell you one of the things we're trying out, and it's not universally available, but it's giving us some really interesting evidence. So we've got some little recorders that go in a vest that go on to children. And we've got one ECE centre, it's our first pilot doing this, where in the ECE centre, every child in the infant and toddler room, all those under 2s, 10 of them, are wearing this device 1 day a week. And the teachers are getting graphs of the amount of interaction each child experiences in an hour, and every hour.
Interesting.
And the number of utterances, responses from the child. The child has to be old enough to be verbalising, so 4 months or so. But you start to see, and what that's giving illustrations to the centre that's doing it about how, whether or not they're as language rich as they thought they were.
I was going to ask, yes. And I can imagine there might be quite a difference between what you do.
And when you start actually analysing on a child-by-child basis what the interaction and talk is really interesting. And I think if I generalise what they find, because this is a really prototype that we're doing at the moment, you've got some really quite confident and wordy little girls who actually are just doing fine, and they're getting a lot of attention, they're talking to themselves, they're getting a lot of interaction from adults. So then you've got some not quite so confident, not quite so verbal, but still getting a lot of interaction and doing a lot themselves. And then you've got a group of little boys who are actually not talking much, and nobody's talking much to them. And they are riding their bikes a lot, and they are outside a lot, and they're tootling about, going about their business, but they're neither being talked with as much nor talking themselves as much, because 3 2-year-old little boys are not necessarily going to talk very much to each other, and they're not going to gift each other things they don't know.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So one of the things is, I'll just talk if that's right, Vicki, but one of the things that parents are surprised when we talk to them about the power of them gifting things the children don't know. They forget that what is every day to the parent is absolutely new and exciting to the child. So that's one thing that is really important, both in services and with families. And another is that actually you need to repeat a lot. You want them to eat their broccoli, so you give them blocks of broccoli. Well, actually, if you want them to be really optimally learning language, you have to be gifting them lots of words and using them over and over again in lots of different contexts. And you ask, what can services do? Some of the work, the preliminary work we did in this was working with a Ministry of Education project called Now We're Talking. And Now We're Talking, the services really started to focus on how they could enrich their own language environment. So teachers focusing on their own word banks, and teachers themselves thinking, actually, maybe we're not being that expressive. Maybe there's a whole lot of ways we could talk about this issue or idea that it just slipped off the radar. It wasn't a high priority. And when they start putting it back, kids, we know that kids love, they can all, lots of children can name Stegosaurus rex from quite an early age if they hear it enough and if they're interested. So it's a matter of marrying up the interests of the teacher, the interests of the child, and the opportunity, and being as language rich as you can, and realising that all of that really matters.
And I think earlier you alluded to sort of the caregiving moments. You mentioned about, there are lots of opportunities when teachers have that one-on-one with the child because they're changing their nappy or they're feeding them their bottle. So that's clearly maybe an area in which could become more language rich, in which teachers genuinely are having a one-on-one moment with a child. It seems clear that would be a great place to start, with ensuring that there is lots of language in
those everyday routines.
Routines.
Yeah. And it is, you forget, I think, when you're facing with lots of children on a really sustained basis, just how important it is to keep enriching. One of the centres that was working on this project, as we were getting started, had realised that they weren't putting many opportunities in front of children, even thinking about opportunities to pick up pencils and write. Children weren't interested. They didn't sort of take them to it, but actually seeing the relationship between writing and ideas and vocabulary was one way they began to get really interested. They started to, even little children, sign themselves in to hold a pencil, and had big sign-in sheets when they arrived, so they could see the relationship between arrival and their name being used and doing that much earlier than they would have expected to do that. Another had been really conscious on how they had simplified language. They don't understand us, so we'll talk simply, as opposed to thinking these children are actually at a stage of brain explosion. The from 18 months to 24 months in particular, their language capability should be absolutely blossoming on a daily basis. But maybe they don't understand us, they're coming from lots of different backgrounds, and maybe we'll keep it all quite, simple and straightforward, which is counter to the evidence, which is actually the richest, most engaging language is the stuff that's likely to fire up those neural pathways that we want to be so developed so they become great learners. And I'm an adult literacy specialist. I'm not an ECE specialist. I've come into this because I've watched people for 30 years come my way without the literacy they need. And there's such a clear relationship and such clear evidence about the language the oral language that you have is the platform for your reading and your writing. You have to have the words in your head, and they only get there when someone gives them to you. An older, more knowledgeable person. Might be an older sibling, might be auntie, might be nana, but it's somebody older noticing that you're interested in something and then giving you something about it that you didn't know over and over again. And then it's that stretch thing that matters even when they're babies, that idea of stretch. They've got a clear idea of what language is by the time they're 7 months old, and it just multiplies from there. That was a long answer.
Thank you, Alison. I know we've probably got lots of people who are listening in who have questions of their own, so please do start using the chat button and firing in your questions for Alison. What would you say it sounds like what we're sort of advocating here is for a sort of constant streaming of talk alongside, babies' everyday actions and activities. What would you say to teachers who consider that kind of constant talk might actually be interrupting children's play, not giving children a little bit of space or time of their own?
And I think
negotiate those sort of contrasting values.
I think that it's a really interesting piece where equity and teachers' professional judgment and children's home experience all kind of come together. It's an interesting question. And I'm not an ECE expert. You know a great deal more about that than I do. But if you think about children who are coming from a background where they're not getting a lot of gifting of new language and new concepts and new ideas, I wonder when they come to an ECE centre if they repeatedly do things that they know and are familiar to them. When teachers see that they're missing out. So I might be in a home environment where I'm getting interactions on an hourly basis, 250 words an hour, from 10 interactions that are extended and back and forth. And I come to ECE and I play, and I've got a lot of things in my head. I've got a lot of concepts about how the world works. I've got a lot of ways to describe the world, and I'm testing them out, and I'm pottering about, doing my own thing, and that's all absolutely cool. But if I'm coming from an environment where nobody's speaking to me very much, and I'm not getting much opportunity to use language, and I come and I do the same thing over and over again because I'm safe and I know that. Is that what we meant when we were doing child-led play? I think we've got to think about that. And I think play with talk.
Yeah.
Play with talk. One of the other, there's early examples of centres. One of them did a little look at library. They wanted to look at their library and why kids weren't using books. And they just observed the library corner, and they realised that while they thought the library was quite busy because kids were over in it, kids weren't actually interacting with the books very much. So they wanted simple, no-cost, low-cost ideas about how do you promote talk. So they took some books about art and painting over to the painting table, and they talked about them with the kids, out of the library corner. And then they did the same thing with books about machinery in the sandpit, and they just had them there. And so they snacked on opportunity when the busy kids were doing things with machinery, using books and adding language. And suddenly they had both much more language and much more books. The children were still playing on the things that interested them, but They were getting gifted this new, exciting knowledge that they wouldn't have got otherwise. So I think the question you've posed is interesting, and I'd like to hear what other people say about it.
I think there's
it's not equal if everybody doesn't start with the same language in their head. And the child-led play is not an equal experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point for us to keep in mind. I think also, though, you have sort of alluded to, when we've talked about the quality of talk experience. So that idea that this is there's quite a reciprocal exchange between teachers and children, and I think that's the sort of interaction that will slow down teachers to ensure that they are really giving the best kind of language experiences, not just blurting out 100 miles an hour, but really thinking about what the children are doing and thinking about what language they can contribute for the child in this moment. Some of our audience tonight would like you to talk a little bit more about that idea of serve and return. The phrase serve and return. So can you explain a little bit more about that?
So it's really what's written in Te Whāriki about, notice, recognise and respond. It's another way of talking about that. But what we do know is, because of this neuroscience investigation, over and over again, they're seeing that it's the return. It's two things. It's one, when children initiate an endeavour to communicate and an adult responds, actually does something to their neural pathways. So when they're little and they're reaching out and showing or stretching or flapping their arms or initiating the communication and someone responds to that, that's particularly important. And the other thing is that serve and return, when you gift them you're gifting them back and forth and you're trying to get an extended conversation. When they're very small, that response, that back and forth response that builds attachment, is actually promoting infant mental well-being. It's attachment through loving touch and responsive talk that gives infants what they need, and infant mental health actually starts, or the lack of infant mental health, vulnerable mental health starts really early, and it's usually in the absence of attachment. So I think everyone can understand the idea of talking to, because we all talk to, and that is come over here, it's reading time, let's go to the mat, we're going to go and do painting, come and put your boots on, mum's coming, here's lunch.
Yeah.
It's me watching you to see what your eyes are saying you're interested in, particularly when you're pre-verbal, and then seeing if I can identify it. And we had a mum the other day say to us, been working with her, she's been working with the Talking Matters initiative for a number of months. She's got 3 children, and one of them, her middle one, who was 2 when we started, she was finding him pretty difficult, and she said, I thought he was being naughty. I just thought he was being naughty all the time. I didn't realise he was trying to communicate with me. He wanted things off me, and I didn't know that. And now I see he's actually wanting something, and I can work out what it is, and I can gift him something, and it's changing her relationship with her 2-year-old, her 6-month-old, and her 6-year-old. It's actually making a difference in the family, because she's seeing the value and the much more fun it is when you've got that response. That's where the magic is, the sweet spot of the oil, the magic oil is when you're a parent and a teacher.
So that's interesting. This isn't just about talking, is it? This is also very much about listening.
Yes. Yeah. We started off talking about talk, sing, read, and now through feedback from our partners, it's talk, read, sing and listen. For that very reason. And you'd have, notice and watch and all those things, but the talk, read, sing and listen sort of summarise that, how you create that sweet spot, or how you create that great relationship.
Yeah, and I think that that's another thing that is very salient in early childhood practice at the moment, is this idea of relationships and building relationships. And clearly I think you're saying that actually the relationship does matter, and that there needs to be, and that both talk leads to the relationship, but relationship also kind of supports the talk.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I think they're inseparable, aren't they? And I think that's one of the things about teacher practice and centre management is how do you have practices that enable that to be sustained with particularly small little people. And I mean, we are talking too about all that pre-verbal stuff and all that non-verbal stuff that goes on as well. It's not just about language, but it's watching them, and it's all that response and expression, and eyebrows and flapping the hands, and all those other things that create the dimensions of a relationship. If you've got a baby waiting to see you in the corner there.
So I think that obviously there's quite a lot of work around sort of attachment relationships in early childhood, and practices such as having key teachers and primary caregiving practices for children. But I think also people listening are also wondering about, is this a sort of thing that small group sizes are important?
Well, I think ratios are incredibly important, whichever way you cut it, and however way you're working with that. I think with littlies, they need relationships and they need time, and they do need time to. We need to watch them so they get enough time to respond. So that teachers are well known for filling the gap with another question. So actually having a practice and having ratios and management and all that enables you to watch and give them, particularly those ones who are probably slow to get communicating, give them time and safety so that they can communicate back. I think that is important. Yeah. And if we were all wonderfully bilingual and trilingual, I'm sure it would help our children too, who are many of them, certainly in Auckland, the great diversity of kids in centres means that they're being exposed to language that's not their first language, and that must be pretty challenging for them and their teachers.
So what would you advise for an early childhood teacher that was themselves bilingual? Is it useful for them to use their home language with the child? Well,
if the children, absolutely. If the children have got their same language, absolutely.
If the children have a different language?
Well, what I understand is that where centres are trying to make families as welcome as they can with as many languages as they can. It's I understand if you've got 27 different ethnicities in a class in an early learning centre or more, it's pretty challenging to know all the greetings. But if they're with you for 5 years, you've got time. And you've probably got parents who can help. And I think it is about a lot of this is about language being intentional, language actually being on the landscape for professional practice, language being the importance of early language becoming the centre of teacher inquiry in ECE centres, becoming the focus of professional learning and development, not just once but on a sustained basis. You can do science and when you're doing a thing on water or movement or whatever your topic is, you're doing language. But it's realising the particular value add of the language, I think, that is so important.
Yeah. And people are asking, do Talking Matters offer professional learning development to parents of early childhood centres?
We're in the office, so there are 4 people in Talking Matters working on this demonstration project. So we've got 4 small scale projects. We've been going. We got substantial funding in May. So although we've been testing out some of our ideas last year, I wanted to say we're really little and we're still really quite a social startup. We do hope in 2019, working with you and working with others, that we're going to do more talking about talk. And we like to produce a Talking Matters 101, a little kit for centres to kickstart their own thinking about talk. That's one of the ideas. We're thinking, what could we do that could get us to scale? Because we're not going to be able to do huge amounts of sustained professional development, but we would like to know and get ideas on how we could help centres be thinking about that for themselves. What kind of resources would be useful to them? What provocations could we give them? What information who are the early oral language professional resources they can go to. I mean, one of the things we know, because we are employing one, is the incredible depth of knowledge with speech and language therapists, and trying to unlock that knowledge and make it more widely known into early learning services and into families and into community, but just in general.
Mm.
So the answer, we're not doing it yet, but watch
the space.
Watch the space, because we're trying to think about smart things we could do and things we could do at scale. Maybe the answer is we need Talking Matters champions. We need to grow oral language experts and confidence in other places. That's certainly an approach they're using in the UK. They're enrolling, gosh, I've forgotten the name of them, but oracy champions in centres. So imagine if you decided, your group of centres decided it would grow 3 oracy champions from the shop floor, from easy, who are particularly interested in language, and they start looking at how they could promote early oral language initiatives and practice at a local level. I think that's the kind of thing we want to talk about and see if we could be a resource to. We're not growing a national PLD service. Not that I think, not at the moment anyway.
But I think, like you say, tying into centres reflective practice and the self-review processes and things like that, it could be a very powerful way forward.
Yes. Do you know Kathy Nutt-Brown's work? So
yes.
Kathy Nutt, from Sheffield. So I got a Winston Churchill Fellowship to go and look at adult literacy, but I ended up, one of the people I met to see was Kathy, because of her work engaging parents in this early literacy and language development. And she's certainly interested and she gave me some ideas about a self-review process where you're thinking about what you're doing with parents and what messages you're giving parents and how you're modelling to parents this information. I think that's a really interesting way to think about it. The centres have got enough, as well as inside with their own teachers.
I apologise, sorry, we're having a very bad storm, and I do hope you can still hear me, can you?
Not very well.
No, might have some interference there.
That's better.
Sorry for that. Yes, I wanted to ask about what do you think what are the possibilities for early childhood teachers supporting parents to understand some of these messages?
Oh, I think it's absolutely enormous. I just went to a conference in Denver called 0 to 3. I'm actually wearing a 0 to 3 badge called Big Voice for Little Kids. And one of the workshops I went to was the role of ECE teachers as advocates for policy and for working with parents. And it was quite provocative, actually, for me to think that it was something out of the ordinary. So I suppose I'd thought and seen ECE centres that we've been working with really actively engaging with parents. So one kindy that we've been working with, just to give an example, we've got a school that's focusing on oral language with the kindy and the hippie that also co-locate on the same, and they're together trying to do Talking Matters to them. And they're all focusing on it together. So the kindy has really taken a whole lot of photographs of interaction with parents, putting them on the notice board, making them very visible, big signs up about the importance of talk in more than one language, and really drawing parents' attention to it by using reading workshops and early reading together and a whole lot of things to promote reading and singing and talking, but in a very low-key way. I think that we've got, during 2019, we'll be able to publish some little case studies of some of the examples of the centres we're working on, who are trying to look at teacher inquiry on oral language in their own centre, using no-cost, low-cost ideas, just the resources of the teachers, to focus on parents, what does work. One centre put a couch and started giving one mum, it started with a mum who had 5 children, and she never had a chance to talk to the baby. So by coming and having breakfast, she actually talked to the baby one-on-one before she went off to her busy day and before the child entered the centre. And that started to actually just a little bit of reflective practice about that one, because changeover was pretty traumatic. Mum was pretty frazzled, and they could see the situation wasn't ideal. So that wasn't, again, a very low cost, low energy idea, but it began to make them think about language at transition and supporting. So I think there's a lot centres can do.
I think centres are in a very powerful position, actually.
It's really about being courageous, probably.
Ideas.
I know some centres, some of the staff we've been working with are more confident now than they were at the beginning about talking to parents about talk. They didn't know what to say. They weren't quite sure how to go about it. That's why we think a Talking Matters 101 might be quite useful. Some of the messages that are useful to promote with parents. Babies are learning from before they're born. They're learning at a phenomenal rate. That gifting them things they don't know is part of the best work that you can do. The serve and return, the noticing them and having them talk with you, get down at their eye level. Some of the information, read to little babies. Families are not confident about reading to little babies, and that's something that really centres can model.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have one more question I want to ask before finishing that's come through. Do you work with early childhood centres to support children with speech impairment or speech difficulties? Or how do the messages you've been giving us tonight apply to those groups of children?
So I would say that isn't a specific focus. We're trying, universal is probably at the moment. But we're working these 4 communities, and in each of the 4 communities, with no screening for children with language delays or cognitive difficulties, they are there. They are there in the families we've been working with. And so in some cases, is the enriched language environment enough? The family is doing it and the service is doing it and the ECE is doing it. That's still to be proven. In some cases it's quite clear, and we've needed to refer them or get the service we're working with to refer them. And so we know that the deaf community are quite interested, because it's really, really important for deaf children to be communicated with in the same way. And that's a whole area of work that we could get into, but we're not there yet. So we, two community activators, me and some support people. But the need is enormous, isn't it? That's why Minister Martin's doing leading the review on special needs. We've got huge issues that we all need to work on together. But if we focus more on early language, maybe some of those things will.
Absolutely.
Some children, be mitigated.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Alison, and thank you for everything you've shared with us tonight. I love this idea of gifting words, and that we can be gifting our infants and children, these words and these concepts to grow their brains and, and just empower them to be the creative and capable learners and thinkers that we know that they are. Just to finish us.
Yanni Van Heese's work, she's a national treasure about early language, and it was Yanni who's promoted us, worked with us a lot to talk about that, and that idea that actually it is a gift that older, knowledgeable people give to kids. And it's what grandparents and aunties often do, but busy parents sometimes don't get the chance, and busy teachers might not either. So
absolutely.
Take it away and use it.
Yeah. No, so thank you for that. And just finish us off tonight, in summary, what would be the most important point that you would like to make to early childhood teachers listening? I mean, what would you gift from your knowledge, your kitty of knowledge, what would you gift to them in terms of sort of a final message of what they can take away from tonight, and maybe what thing you'd like them to go into their centres tomorrow and try to be thinking about, to be doing with their children?
One thing, or maybe two. One is to talk to your colleagues about how, and your managers, about how you get this on the early oral language on your professional development agenda for 2019. That's one thing. And the second thing is, go watch the quietest. Go watch a couple of children. Just watch them, follow them for an hour or two. Just keep an eye on them and actually see how much interaction they're experiencing, how many opportunities there are for them to be gifted things they don't know, new vocabulary, and to express themselves. And use that observation again as a provocation in your own service or centre. I think we've all got to raise the bar, actually. I think we've all got, I mean, we're going to really make a difference here. We've all got to see that children are capable of more, and we have to expect more of ourselves in order to be able to have them reach their potential. I could go on about that piece a lot. We're finding that quite a bit, actually, that in communities where there's not a lot of talking going on with children, everyone's expectations are low. But children are capable of this phenomenal learning, speed of learning, and oral language capability. So let's give them that opportunity.
Yeah, we need to enact that aspiration from Te Whāriki. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us tonight, Alison, and we look forward to working with you again with the Education Hub and watch this space for some more coming our way.
Watch our Facebook page, look at our website. Those are useful resources to get started if you aren't connecting. And you can join the network even if you're not in Auckland. Join the network, you'll get newsletters from us, and that might be interesting. And talk to your services around you about how to grow a network around you too, focused on talk. Yeah.
So can we we'll make sure that we circulate that information about your website. And thank you very much, Alison.
Thank you so much. Lovely.
Finish there and look forward to working with you again.